Hey YouTube, welcome back. This is Mr. Terry. Today we're checking out part 2 of Oversimplified's Hitler video. If you didn't see part 1, there will be a link to it down below, so make sure you check that out. Really enjoyed the first one. It went into a lot of his pre-World War I kind of life, with a lot of obstacles and things he had to go through, which I'm sure added to kind of the person he's going to become. But today, with this part 2, I'm assuming it'll be a lot more about, his life after the war. And what you will notice is he's a very, very different person after the war than he was in the first war. And I talk a lot more about that in part 1, so make sure you see that. But let's go ahead and see what part 2 has to offer us. If you like this content, make sure you stick around to this channel. To my channel here, where we will doing more of this and trying to check out and react and comment on other history videos. If you do like what Oversimplified is doing here, I highly recommend that you go to the original video, which I will put a link in for down in the description as well, so you can give them credit because these people do a fantastic job with these history videos. So let's go ahead and start part 2 and see what they got for us.
Since Germany's military had to be reduced, Hitler could no longer remain a soldier after the war, but he kept working for the army as an informant. After the war, communists in Germany had attempted a revolution, and the government was worried about communism in general. So Hitler was tasked with infiltrating and reporting on any new political parties that could pose a communist threat. A new party called the German Workers' Party threw up a whole bunch of red flags, so Hitler went along to one of their meetings, but found that they weren't communist at all. They were extreme right and shared many of his extreme beliefs, so
Interesting time here, right? He's come back from war. He cannot find work as the economy is completely ruined in Germany. But the government was, again, very wary of these groups and the idea of people become radicalized, especially with communists. And yeah, Hitler got a little post-war job of basically being a spy. Hey, go check out this new political party, the German Workers' Party. And yeah, you come and find out that he's there to spy on them. And after meeting and going to these meetings, he's like, these people I agree with. They're not like anti-German communists. They're people that are just like him. They're regular people that are still loyal to the idea of Germany. Don't necessarily like the government that is currently in Germany, because a lot of people like Hitler thought that they just sold out their country by agreeing to the Treaty of Versailles, which, if you have studied the Treaty of Versailles, is basically just designed to destroy Germany in the future. And a lot of people like Hitler did not take that well, and had especially fought in the war, were basically offended by the treaty as just a slap in the face to the nature of their country and to their pride. So you could see that, and as somebody going back into society trying to find a place to belong again, because the war gave him a place to belong, which he didn't have before the war. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to see him, and they'll talk about how he kind of flies up the ranks with these people.
He left the army and signed up to join the party. His fantastic speaking abilities impressed the party's leadership and supporters, and he very quickly rose to the top. He decided the party needed a makeover, so he renamed it to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi for short, and he gave it a new color scheme. The Nazis weren't very specific on policy, but Hitler made extravagant promises to return Germany to its former glory by undoing the Treaty of Versailles and reuniting all ethnic Germans into one nation. He also said that only pure Aryan people should be allowed to be citizens, and that all Jews would lose their citizenship.
So if you don't know about Aryan history, the Aryan group is a very ancient race that has a lot of mystery in their origins. They were most definitely an Indo-European people that people believe that would have come probably from the Eastern Europe area. Now, they're most famous as the people that came in and basically conquered India. And there was a mythology basically in this part of Europe, in Germany, that Germans were ancestors of these people. They were a great race, and of course they talk about how they were like a lighter skinned people, and you hear that with Hitler talking about that. But yeah, there was this kind of folklore in German history that Germans were descendants of these people, and since they saw them as an advanced people, they people that believed in this thought that the ancestors of the Aryans, like a lot of these Germans are a naturally superior people, whereas the Jews, of course, which you saw in part 1, blamed by a lot of people for the war. They thought they kind of sold out and were conspirating, or conspirators, right, against the Germans in the war. So that's some context to understand if this is, doesn't make sense. Look into Aryans, ancient Aryans, and things like that, and you'll see where this comes from.
These ideas were already common in extreme right politics, but what set the Nazis apart was Hitler himself, and they quickly became the leading party on the extreme right. Many of the political parties in Germany at the time had paramilitary wings, and the Nazis were no different. Hitler set up the very descriptive Whole Protection Detachment, later changed to the very delightful Gymnastic and Sports Division, and finally settling on the ominous Storm Detachment, or SA for short. Their job was to defend Nazi party meetings and intimidate political opponents, and they would frequently engage in battles with communists on the streets. Since the Allies had demanded a reduction in Germany's military size, many trained soldiers were left unemployed. They liked the Nazi ideology, and it was only natural for them to join the SA, which grew larger and...
The last people you want to offend are your war veterans when it comes to these conflicts. Similar to in Italy, that's where Mussolini got his support from, was from former soldiers. And you have these workers that have come back from the war to basically nothing, and not maybe the respect they believe they deserve. So that's a group that is can be kind of dangerous with, I guess, in a way, especially if you can unify them, which looks like Hitler's doing a pretty good job of doing.
And larger over time. The new democratic government that formed after World War I was pretty weak and ineffective. In order to pay reparations to the Allies, it started printing more money. The problem is that printing money doesn't actually give a country more money, it just makes money less valuable. So as the country printed more and more money, it became worth less and less, and the currency crashed. In 1919, one US dollar was worth about 4 German marks. By December 1923, one US dollar was equal to 4.2 trillion marks. The price of bread rose to 200 billion marks. Banknotes became worthless. Unsurprisingly, in such an economic crisis, Germany struggled to pay the Allies. The French were pissed about this, so they occupied the Ruhr, an area full of factories, and took the economic output from the area as payment. They treated the German civilians badly, and in total, approximately 130 Germans were killed during the occupation. Germans were furious, and Hitler and the Nazis thought that now would be a great time to lead a revolution. In November 1923, inspired by something a certain bold Italian man did a year earlier, Hitler stormed a meeting at a beer hall and called for an uprising against the government.
Yeah, they kind of glossed over it, but Benito Mussolini had done a successful takeover with his fascist party years before, here in the early 20s, and it was successful. And Hitler, being somebody that was very influenced by Mussolini and the fascist policy, the whole their whole platform, thought that, hey, this could work. It worked in Italy. This can work in Germany. We can do a takeover. Now, Mussolini had a lot more support at this time than Hitler did, right? And the German government is also expecting this, right? Because they saw it happen in Italy. They do not want to go the way of Germany. So they're going to be a lot better prepared for it. And I'm sure they're going to get to that, of what the result of this attempted takeover of government will look like.
Government. With his supporters, he marched on the streets of Munich, hoping the police would join his side. They did not.
Yeah, it's like, hey, join us.
Hitler was put on trial for treason. He could have been sentenced to life, but the right-wing judges thought he was a pretty cool guy. Hitler knew the judges and knew that they would be lenient, so he took the opportunity to make impassioned speeches during the trial. And in the end, he was sentenced to just 5 years in prison, of which he only served 9 months. And when I say prison, it was more like a pleasant hotel stay where he had plenty of time to write a book. The whole affair was covered by the media nationwide, and
how lucky is this guy to be able to not... it's treason. Think about if you're in America or whatever country you're from that you're watching this. If you tried to do an armed revolution, of taking a violent one, of taking over the government, and it didn't work, and you get arrested, and you only get 5 years, and he only serves 9 of it. Only has to serve 9 months of those 5 years. That's pretty incredible that he was able to get there. I don't know what that trial was like, that if he was able to actually talk down his sentence. That's pretty incredible of what he was able to achieve there. I don't know exactly what he was talking about. I'm sure just trying to talk about how proud German he was and that sort of thing. So, but prison also, even though it's 9 months, prison is a time that you have a lot of time to think and fester. And you can use, people use that time, all that being alone to your thoughts for different things. A lot of people use it to kind of better themselves and be more introspective. And what you see with Hitler, though, is using, it seems, that time to just compile all of his thoughts and into, of course, the book he writes in prison, which is Mein Kampf, which I'm sure a lot of you understand that becomes kind of a basis for Nazi ideology. So festering on all this stuff, on his personal life, and then all of the atrocities to Germany, both internally and externally. And that's going to come through in this book. So he really uses his time again to get his thoughts together and just festers more on, the things he finds as problems. Angry man hates a lot of people. Here we go. All right, I'm doing a lot of breaks. I'll try to slow down with those.
It made Hitler famous. Hitler and his extreme message were now known throughout Germany, but the everyday German still didn't care much for him. In the 1928 election, the Nazis only won about 2% of the vote. Many were still intimidated by all the violence and the shouting and how unpolitician-like he was. But a new economic crisis would change all of that. To help Germany pay its reparations, America agreed to give it loans. In October 1929, the Wall Street crash happened, and America wanted its money back. The economic strain this put on an already struggling Germany was severe. Unemployment skyrocketed, poverty was widespread, and Germans were sick of it. It was clear that the newly formed democracy wasn't working. In the face of crisis, Germans began moving to the political extremes. If you were German and wanted change, your choices now were either the communists or the Nazis. Hitler claimed that he was the only one who could return Germany to its former glory. The Nazi Party used propaganda to make Hitler seem like a great and powerful man, and they gave the German people a scapegoat to blame for all their suffering. The promise of a single strong dictator was a breath of fresh air for Germans after years of failing democracy. Some bought into his extreme ideology. Some didn't agree with the racism, but were willing to vote for him anyway. Many didn't know much about politics at all, but just got caught up in the hype.
Sure.
Election after election, the Nazis became more and more popular, until in 1932, they became the biggest party in the German parliament. Hitler came to truly believe that he was some sort of great, destined savior of Germany. He turned megalomaniac.
Yep.
He decided to run for president, and did surprisingly well, but still lost to the extremely popular World War I general, Paul von Hindenburg.
Yeah, he loses.
Since he was now the leader of the biggest party, though, he demanded President Hindenburg make him chancellor. But Hindenburg was reluctant, seeing that Hitler was clearly such a big racist. Industry leaders urged Hindenburg to give Hitler the chancellorship, fearing the rising support for communism, and leader of the Center Party, von Papen, who had been secretly negotiating with Hitler, said to Hindenburg, "How about we make Hitler chancellor on the condition that I get to be vice-chancellor, and most government jobs go to us moderate conservatives?"
Yeah, so they're thinking, all right, this guy is still super popular, and there's a lot of people that support him. They want him to have a voice. So, von Hindenburg here is kind of thinking that by putting him in government to this position as chancellor, which I believe is, I think, more ceremonial than anything, but hoping that would pacify the movement. But it fails, obviously.
That way, I'll get to keep my power. We'll get to keep our power, and we'll control Hitler like he's our angry little puppet.
I think they can
What
control
could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything. Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, but he was not yet a dictator. In February, the German parliament building was set on fire. Historians still aren't sure who did it, and many suspect the Nazis did it themselves, but Hitler blamed the communists, and he convinced President Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree allowing him to imprison all communists and other political opponents.
Whether that was intentional or not by the Nazis, that burning down of the Reichstag was huge for them, because what it did is villainize the communists, as it was said to be them. Again, they don't know exactly who started it, but either way, whether it was them or not, Hitler was able to use this as a way to, again, get more power. Right? You get like some constitutions have these emergency clauses, and you can, if you're in a state of emergency, or can get something declared as a state of emergency, it gives more central power back to the government, and some rights can be limited during those times, and just, again, gives more authority and direct executive powers to the government. And if that was something the Nazis did and it's staged, it was pretty brilliant on their part. If they didn't do it and it was actually done by communists, same thing. It helps the Nazi platform even more. So this was, for the Nazis, a good thing for them to happen.
Communists and others were sent off to the first concentration camp in Dachau. At this time, the elderly President Hindenburg passed away, giving Hitler the perfect opportunity. He introduced a law to parliament that would allow him to make all future laws and decisions entirely on his own. With his political opponents imprisoned and the SA intimidating others, Hitler's law passed.
You never call it
Just
like
2
I'm
months
gonna be
after
a
becoming
dictator
chancellor,
now,
Hitler was
but
now
all the
a
elements
dictator.
give dictatorship.
He still
power.
had one problem. The leader of the SA wanted the SA to take over the job of the regular German army, and the German army didn't like that idea. Hitler needed to maintain the support of his professionally trained German army, more so than his rough and rowdy SA. So one night in June 1934, he had Röhm and many other of his own SA officers rounded up and murdered. While he was at it, he took the opportunity to brutally settle some personal scores as well. Politicians who had disagreed with him in the past
basically just eliminated all the competition, both internally and externally. Night of the Long Knives, I believe that's called, where, yeah, just they carry his, stormtroopers there, as they were called, went in and just murdered all these guys, and that by doing that strengthens his power because his opponents are now gone.
Reporters who had printed negative articles about him. One guy who did absolutely nothing, but they thought he was someone else. In some cases, even their families were murdered. In total, up to 200 people were killed in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. The army, now satisfied that they wouldn't be replaced, pledged total allegiance to their new Führer, and Hitler's control was now absolute. Life in Germany changed violently. Freedom of the press, expression, and public assembly were suspended. Jews were initially branded and their businesses boycotted, and eventually Hitler would go on to have 6 million Jewish men, women, and children killed in concentration camps. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced into sterilization for physical and mental imperfections. The Hitler Youth became a way to brainwash the young. Boys were trained to fight and returned home from camp violent. Girls were told their purpose was to have many pure Aryan children, and they would sometimes return from camp pregnant. When their parents were understandably horrified, their children would threaten to turn them over to the Gestapo for standing in the way of Germany's greatness. The standard greeting changed, and you could be sent to a concentration camp for not using it. This way, it seemed like everyone was a Nazi supporter. If you dared oppose Hitler or speak out against him in any way, you also would be sent to a concentration camp. German nationalism captivated the young Adolf. Extreme ideology and anti-Semitism festered in him as a young man living a hard life on the streets. Germany's defeat in the First World War filled him with hatred and a thirst for vengeance. A political movement that treated him like a god, and hundreds of thousands looking up to him as their savior, made him a megalomaniac. And soon, his aggressive foreign policies would drag the world into a second tragic global conflict, otherwise known as
There's so many things, I could have talked about that with the lead up to eventually the Holocaust. One thing to look at if you're studying this stuff is this point right here. The turning on the Jews here was not something that was an overnight thing. I mean, that started early on. But also, it wasn't this immediate thing where it was like all of a sudden, Jews had this huge part of society and then just got taken away immediately and immediately just killed. Like, there was years and years of oppression put on the Jews. It started out much smaller. At first, it was like, trying to get people to think that the Jews had, whether it's economic conspiracy or whatever, or they are the purpose for the economic problems like the Great Depression there. And by doing that, trying to think of the Jews as other. They talk about with boycotts. That was a big thing where it became this point of national pride to buy German things. And once they had come to this state where they didn't see the Jews as real Germans, right, because they weren't Aryan, that by boycotting Jewish businesses, that you were doing your patriotic duty, right? So that put the Jews, of course, into a bad economic situation and was hard to leave. One of the biggest things I've heard about in my classes and things is why didn't the Jews leave? Like, during these years of political and economic oppression that were leading up eventually into the concentration camps. And when you look at it, the design was kind of twofold. I believe the Nazis, they want to make the Jewish experience so bad that they'll want to leave. They want these people to leave, whether it's on their own or they try to deport people. You can look into that of trying to deport Jews. But after years and years of this economic problems, a lot of these Jews, they don't have the means to just uproot their families and move them, so they're kind of stuck. And then, of course, as the years go by, and then once the war starts in 1939, that took so much attention away that the Nazis are going to, enter a harsher period later on, especially starting in the early 1940s when you start getting the camps, and then you get what's called the final solution. Definitely look into that. Final solution is basically a decision to execute the Jews, basically execute Europe's Jews, which by then most of the Jews of Europe were kind of under Nazi occupation, especially with Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe. So, but anyway, that really takes a lot more discussion to go into. So we'll kind of save it for that. But just wanted to give you an idea, a little bit about to make sure that you understand that it was a slow process for these Jews from, again, this oppression to eventually the mass slaughter. You know what I mean? But all right. Well, anyway, another good video by the Oversimplified folks of doing a good job bringing in some of these details and some of these other backstories and things like that. So that was great. Okay, make sure that, again, if you really liked this video, the original video, that you go to the links down below to make sure you give them likes and subscribes and your views. And if you liked just me doing the commentary on it, be sure to stick around, as I'm sure there'll be more of these coming up. If you have any suggestions of videos to watch, put them down in the comments, and I'll see what I can do to get to those. All right, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.